Hey there folks. This is our first video for our first chapter from Campbell's biology text. That's Reese et al. For Bio 109 at Santa Ana College. This will cover Chapter 1, Themes in the Study of Biology, sections 1.1 through 1.4. So this is definitely the place to start if this is your first video for this chapter. That said, welcome to your text. This first chapter is going to get us started from the ground up. These are going to be some very basic concepts, things like biology and what is it and why do we study it. Let's start there. Biology is the study of life, and when we're looking at life on this planet, there are specific characteristics that we use to differentiate between what we consider to be living and non-living matter. Specifically, 7 major characteristics for living matter. Living matter on this planet shows order, that is some form of organization down at the cellular level and above. It reproduces it somehow. This may be sexual or asexual. Yes, asexual. There are organisms out there you will be learning about that are so small, usually one cell, where all they have to do to reproduce themselves is just make a copy and split off. However, even these copies grow, they develop, they come into an adult function of some kind. They process energy. They need to get their energy for functioning somewhere, whether that's ultimately directly from sun through photosynthesis, as is the case with plants, or whether you are a different manner of organism and you cannot make your own energy, but you consume another organism and get that energy from them, as we do. Regulation refers to regulating the interior environment. As mammals, we are warm-blooded, but that also means that we need to regulate our interior environment all the time in regards to hormonal balance, temperature, and a number of other things we're going to get into over the course of this semester. We also all respond to our environment somehow. If you are poked, you respond, and so does every other living thing on this planet. And last and certainly not least, we all show forms of evolutionary adaptation, which is to say that over time, as populations of specific species live in one area for long periods of time, subsequent population generations become better suited to living in that area. Moving right along. When we are looking at especially energy flow and energy processing, which I was just talking about, there is a flow from the sun through all levels of different ways of looking at organizing living beings on this planet. From biosphere at the very largest level, which contains all of that part of the earth that you're looking at a particular moment, and all of the ecosystems that are part of it, to the ecosystem, next step down over on the left, which contains a community and its living and non-living surroundings. So that's everything that lives in an area and all of the non-living things they are interacting with that affects their life on a daily basis. When we go down one level further, we're just looking at living things, at the community. Take, for instance, the example we have here going over at the left. We're looking at a prairie. And all of the populations that live on this prairie include things like the bison, the prairie dogs, the snakes, the hawks. The grass is also a population, which may be sort of an odd idea because we're not used to thinking of plants as living things in the same way that we are used to thinking about animals, but they are. It might take a little shift of how you think about it, but they are. So the grasses themselves have their own population. And then you can look at specific populations. And when we talk about populations in biology, we're talking about just one species at a time, because even if they're all living in the same area, different populations need different things. This graph is looking at just the bison. So we can look at just the bison herd. Where do they need to live? How much space do they need? And how much food do they need to eat? And then you can zoom in and look at just one organism, just that bison, or just some of the cells inside that bison, maybe specialized cells, like in the brain, or just one cell by itself, or even just the specific molecules inside that cell. For all of this, for producers that photosynthesize and make energy from heat energy from the sun, or the consumers that eat those plants, converting from heat and light energy into chemical energy that any other organism can use. We're going to be looking at this hierarchy of organization in this course, how energy is passed through from one level to the next. When we talk about those specific cells, there are actually different types of cells on this planet, not just plant and animal, but different types of cells in an even more basic level. Prokaryotes and eukaryotes. Now the cell is the smallest, most basic form of life on this planet, but not all cells evolved in exactly the same direction. Some are much older in their evolutionary pathway than others. The oldest cells, even though they have current present-day descendants, the oldest cells on this planet are called prokaryotes, pro meaning before. And they're very, very simple inside. They're just one membrane wrapped around some liquid media, and they've got DNA floating inside them. But there's nothing to really separate that DNA from the rest of the cell. There's nothing protecting that DNA from anything else in the cell or from any other problems the cell may have. On the other hand, eukaryotes, here on the right, are much more complex. And most of the life that you are familiar with thinking about on this planet are made of eukaryotic cells. They still have DNA. All cells do. But their DNA is compartmentalized. It's wrapped up in its own membrane, called the nucleus, and that protects the DNA inside the cell. Eukaryotes also tend to be larger, and they have much more complex structure. They have lots and lots of what we call organelles. They're little structures inside the cell that perform jobs for the cell that are very much like jobs that your organs perform for you inside your body. The example here is the mitochondria, which we classically know as the powerhouse of the cell. The mitochondria is the place inside the cell where nutrients and molecules that cell is going to digest and use for energy get broken down, and that energy gets absorbed so it can be used elsewhere in the cell. Last but not least, for this video, we're going to take a step back again and look at how that energy that we were just looking at before gets processed throughout a system. All energy in an ecosystem and in the biosphere ultimately comes from the sun. It's our major source of energy. The first living beings, the first living things on the planet that can access that energy are plants. This is why they're called producers. They are the first living things that can produce chemical energy from the heat light energy they get from the sun through the process of photosynthesis. And no, it's not a perfect process. Some heat is lost, as you can see here, from the sun through the plant, but also some heat escaping off to the side. Not all light and not all heat that can be absorbed can necessarily be used right away. Sometimes it's too much. Sometimes the plant can only work so hard. And this goes the same way for every living thing on the planet. Consumers are living things that eat producers. Things like this rabbit or this mouse. They can't photosynthesize for themselves, but they can nosh on that plant and get their nutrients and energy that way. So as you'll see, lots of energy moves through those animals, and yes, some heat gets lost. These animals produce heat to maintain their inner ecosystems, and some of that heat gets lost. There are also secondary consumers. Those are animals that eat the animals that eat the plants. We are a form of that kind of consumer. We eat all manner of other animals, and we get energy from their byproducts like milk, cheese, meat, eggs, you name it. Ultimately, all of these things, however, must die, which is when we move on to a new form of consumer. These are decomposers. There at the bottom where it says death and decomposition. Decomposers are frequently animals like earthworms, termites, but also lots of bacteria that live down in the soil and help break down dead and decaying matter. This is how nutrients get recycled back down into the soil. Lots of those nutrients end up back into a new plant. Some of that energy, instead of being recycled in nutrients in the soil, is lost as heat. but the cycle starts over again. Nutrients back up into the plants with more energy from the sun into those producers, into consumers, going round and round. It's the energy cycle. All right, folks, this is going to conclude this video. I'll see you as we pick up the next one.